And now we present to you Thac0 with Advantage.
Welcome to Thac0 with Advantage. We're two friends who've been playing D&D for a long time. While we both love lots of other RPGs, D&D keeps us trying to find new ways to start over again. Hi, I'm Ange, and I've been gaming for over 3 decades. Started with 1st edition, and I haven't stopped yet. I've been writing for Gnome Stew for a decade now, and I run the Gnomecast, the Stew's podcast.
I'm Jared, the empty husk that's haunting the internet. I've been here the whole time. You can find me at Gnome Stew and on my own site, whatdoiknowjr.com. After we look at the games we're running in the campaign journal, we'll discuss different ways to begin campaigns. Then, in our downtime research segment, we'll recommend some D&D related content for you to check out.
Now stand by for station identification. This is WD&D the Role Player. Now we're going to McElroy McKinney and the Bardic College.
So the original Dark Sun campaign setting box set suggested that at the beginning of the campaign, players make character trees. AD&D 2nd edition didn't actually want you to play plants. Character trees were a group of 4 characters that the player managed. Now, they could swap these characters out between adventures or when one of the characters died. Now, each time an active character gained level, they could pick one of the other characters in that tree for an additional level, which also encouraged you to rotate active characters. So while AD&D 1st edition didn't want you to share items with other party members, AD&D 2nd edition didn't want you to share items with yourself. This makes me wonder if characters in a character tree needed followers to protect them from the other characters of the same player. That would be pretty bizarre, but I could see it happening. I really could.
Let me just finish up this campaign journal.
So, we were finally able to get back to Jared's Midgard game. But I'm going to let him talk about that. My Tales of the Old Margrave game is on hold because the February is Februarying. And I've got some busy weekends happening that are getting in the way of regular gaming. I'm still doing lots of gaming because of said busy weekends, but we're not going to get to play the Margrave game until after this recording next week. And I think it'll happen between now and the next recording of the show, so I'll probably talk about it then, but nothing this time. The Poison Kingdom, though, that did happen, and it was in person again. Yay! But it was also a slightly weird situation because we did an afternoon session because Les had come into town to go to a friend's birthday party in the evening, but still wanted to run the game. And so what we decided to do is start gaming at 2:00, play till 6:00, and then go out to dinner. And then the rest of us would go home like old people, and Les would go to her party. In the game, I was not as distracting as normal. Apparently, playing in the afternoon is a little easier on me when it's in person. Also, we've been playing in person a lot, so maybe it's just not becoming as shiny and new. Well, it's still me. I'll still be easily distracted. Anyway, in-game, we had continued on to go rescue Nox's siblings, Ember and Eos, who are also based on the player's other cats. We instead discovered a monster hidden under some ruins. It was a huge pain. It had tentacles and could teleport and could grapple 4 of us, and it was a Balanoth, which Les had been planning on using since she started the campaign. I believe they're from Forgotten Realms, but regardless, it was very icky and a wonderful monster to fight. Several of our folks went down more than once during the fight, so my cleric, Balana, spent most of her time using her spell slots to cast Healing Word to get people up. Get back in the fight!
You know what's funny?
Yeah?
I know you have run into a Balhanoth before because that was in the Night Hag's lair.
Was it?
Yes.
Did we actually fight it?
Yes, that was the thing that its teleportation is weird because of how it triggers.
Oh, that's right. And it didn't seem as much of a threat then, because I think we were like probably twice the level of these characters.
That was more of a guardian for the Night Hag there instead of the main issue.
Oh, we were probably 8th level at that time in your campaign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in Poison Kingdom, we were 4th.
Bit of a difference.
Yeah, a teeny bit of a difference. I mean, like, this was a tough fight for 6 4th level characters, where it was a cakewalk for 4 8th level characters. I vaguely remember your version of it kind of whining a little bit because we didn't let him do anything. Anyway, Eos and Ember showed up, and they took us to a village of little lizard people who had set up their home around a spring of purified water that was quite unusual in these poisoned lands. The lizard people were very cute and fun for Les to roleplay. We ended up investigating the source of the spring, and we discovered that there was a magical font, a source of power that belonged to Xarxes' patron, and it was purifying the water as it flowed out of the poisoned lands and into this place. We also realized we could power up some of the minor magic items we'd picked up along the way by putting them into the magical font, which was Les's plan all along, because, hey, we're now 5th level and we're headed into the finale of this campaign, which is going to be fun because we are doing the finale in person. Shocking. And it is one of the players' birthday. Kiko's player is having his birthday and he wanted to do something fun for it. So we're going to be playing in person, and we are going to have 2 additional players to actually play Ember and Eos in action, which will be fun. 5th level. I have spirit guardians now. I'm going to picture this as hundreds of tiny cats zooming around Bellana as they slash and scratch with their tiny little death claws.
Just describing what it is in your spirit guardians makes it worth it for the DM when they destroy all of our monsters and NPCs.
Spirit Guardians is fun. I am super glad that I'm going to get to use it at least once in our big final fight. The other interesting aspect of this is that Kiko's player, friend of the show, Doug Roz, is a huge Lego fan, and we are having this game and his birthday celebration at a local Lego store called Brick Rock. They have agreed to do an after-hours event for us, and so we will likely be using Lego minifigs as our characters for this final battle.
Nice.
It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm not going to say anything else about it because I think this episode drops before his birthday, and I don't want to spoil anything.
Surprise! Well, as Ange mentioned, we had our first Maria game in Midgard in 2025. Because we have been on a hiatus for a while, I kind of wanted to jumpstart things, so I had them all start on a ship to begin with. So they're already on the ship. They've been underway in this voyage for about 3 days at this point. I introduced them to all of the crew members that have been on the ship that they've been interacting with for the last 3 days. Kazina and the rat folk rig runner are up on the mast, and they see a ship sailing towards them, flying the colors of Glavistus, who is the flame dragon that's the rival of their employer, Urazaza. They are undercover. They're not supposed to be acting as agents of Urazaza. One of the effects of that is that Marin has a hat of disguise. So our Amethyst Dragonborn is wearing this hat of disguise, pretending to be a human. If you have never seen the Dragon Prince, it was on par with Rayla when she is walking around talking about, "Ooh, I'm a human, look at my 5 fingers."
Hello, fellow humans.
So they had to decide whether they wanted to parlay, fight, or run. They chose to run, especially since they're meant to be undercover. So we ran a group skill check using a modified version of some of the ship rules from Ghost of Saltmarsh, and they managed to outrun the ship. Because in those rules you have like total success, success, failure, total failure, they got just the regular success, so they got about a day off course by outrunning them. You would have stayed on track if you would have gotten the total success, but that's okay. So after we did that, we flashed back to what they did the week before we left. Because I kind of wanted to get them in, remind them, you are going on this undercover mission. It is already underway. But now we can go fill in some details.
Yeah, because honestly, if we had started with your journey starts tomorrow, the entire session would have been that day.
Yes. And this way, it's always in your mind that we are on the ship. We are on the way there. This is just us flashing back to what we did going into this. So each of the PCs had kind of their own vignette showing what was going on before they left. Marin had a one-on-one meeting with Ambassador Darius, the kobold that works for Urazaza, and he's basically trying to explain to Marin that he is worried about the political ramifications and how dangerous this mission is and how this is the boldest that Urazaza has ever been in directly opposing Glavistus, to which Marin basically responded, I follow orders and I love the Empire, and if we die, cool. I died doing something for Urazaza.
Actually, if I remember correctly, his response was, I will be fine.
Yeah, I'll be fine if my companions die.
If
I'll be
my
sad,
companions die
but-
in service to the Empire, I will be sad, but I'm sure I will be fine.
Ivy and Krotatup are formerly Ratatosk, who is currently a tiny humanoid possum, had a dream where they ran into Lady Ire, who is the Valkyrie that is the ancestor of Ivy, and Ivy is an Aasimar, so that is where she gets her divine spark from there. And in their dream, they got a warning that the Trickster is involved with the mission that they are embarking on, and that Krotatup has not found out when his possum curse will end. The other thing about that is that Ivy is descended from Balder, so there is a little bit of extra enmity between the Trickster, whoever that might be, and Balder in this instance. So, giving him a little bit of foreshadowing there.
I can't imagine who the trickster is as I look over at the chair with the black cat in it, who is named after a certain trickster, Norse god.
And then Kazina had a meeting with Gertie, who is the fence that is a friend of hers, the older woman that knows both the sisters. What was interesting about this scene with Gertie was originally I had actually set this up to be a Nezek, but Ange had already framed some scenes with a Nezek, and I didn't want to walk any of that back or say that wasn't her or it was her, but strangely she's over here. The nice thing about having multiple NPCs that are tied to your PCs is you can switch to somebody else in the narrative to perform the same function. After she had been talking to Gertie for a while, it didn't take Kazina too long to pick up on the fact that this was probably not actually Gertie, because Gertie was telling her that she needs to get that scroll that summons her grandfather so she can make a wish on it, and if they do it now, at least they can plan out what kind of wish they do, and it'd be much better than anyone else finding that scroll.
Kazina is interesting in that she has a very high insight. She understands people, but a very low charisma. Just because she understands them doesn't mean she can talk to them.
Once she called out that Gertie was not Gertie, she was concerned that Gertie was okay. On the meta level, as a DM, after having the NPCs that I did that were trapped in the burning building last year when we had that big climatic fight, I am not going to do that again anytime soon. But I understand that Kazina is making sure that Gertie's okay. Gertie's fine, she just wasn't there. It turns out that Kazina didn't figure this out, but Ange did, that it is a Rakshasa that is working for the Cult of Mammon. He basically only had to try and trick her into using the scroll, and then his job was done. So after that, he was kind of amused at the entire situation and just kind of like poking at it to see what's going to happen. Almost like, a cat batting around a mouse while they're playing with it.
Cats is gonna cat.
He basically let slip that her grandfather was not a devil until after he died, which implies that maybe there is some other fiendish connection in the family's past other than the grandfather, and that the grandfather is currently a Redabishe, which is a type of devil that can control dragons. He wants to be summoned into the Empire because Mammon really wants to get his claws into some dragons, and the Archdevil of Greed, for some reason, thinks that getting into the Dragon Empire would be a good move for him.
Yeah, and Kazina's like, okay, A, that's a really, really bad idea. B, she's not sure if she should tell our kobold representative there about this, because he was trying to find some way to declare the non-dragonkin members of the party as dragons so they could be full citizens. And I'm like, this might do the exact opposite of that for Kazina.
Yeah, it is interesting because depending on who hears it, not that your friends would necessarily be a problem, but that almost makes you a liability to the Empire.
Yeah.
We wrapped up the session at this point. not so much because we had to, because I prepped a good amount of stuff, but because the 2024 character sheet in Roll20 was causing all of us to have spasms because it was not working the way it should have been working. And what's weird is when I set this up, I played around with the sheets and things seemed to be working okay. But between little ins and outs that I just wouldn't catch, and then it literally just not working in some instances, it was just a nightmare.
I mean, it looks great. When they get it working, it's going to be beautiful. But the problem is it wasn't picking up all the ability stuff from various magic items, even though it looked like it was set correctly. There were just a lot of weird little fiddly bits. It took me going back and forth between my PDF copy of Kazina and the 2014 version of Kazina to realize, oh, okay, I'm down a hit point and I'm missing a plus in all my ability scores because she's got a thing that gives her a +1 to all skills and saving throws and all that. None of that was represented, so.
And I think it was a combination because I don't think that some of that stuff was the character sheet per se. It's that they have to rebuild all the magic items to work with that character sheet. And I think some of the magic items are still just, here's the name of an item. It looks like it works, but it doesn't actually yet.
Yeah.
So you have to go in and actually force it to do what it's supposed to do. And then, I was trying to drag and drop things onto Ivy's character sheet, and I did it 5 or 6 times, and finally it showed up.
I think Ivy's character sheet is cursed.
It is. It really is.
Even in the old version, it was cursed.
Yeah, when I converted the game over, it looks like it kicked back to a previous version of her character sheet that it wouldn't let me open in the other campaign in the 2014 sheet.
If it weren't for the sunk cost fallacy, literally, I'd say we could go play on Shard.
Yeah, I know. I mean, honestly, I don't have a problem with that going forward. It's just we're still kind of half and half, this is more of a 2014 game that is using Cold Bull Press stuff rather than a Tales of the Valiant game.
Yeah.
But I have no problem with that myself at this point.
Yeah, I mean, there's all the 2014 stuff is over there.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, if I bumped up my subscription a level, I could share all the 2014 stuff that I created with you. The modern foibles of D&D and D&D-like games is figuring out the best way to play when you're not in person.
Yeah.
There's going to be tech hiccups.
I was this close to saying I should have never left Albert Rodeo. I just need tokens on a map. That's it. You keep track of your own character sheets.
We did have a fun conversation about money though, because I was asking if I could get Kazina a pair of sending stones that she could have one and Nezik could have one so we could stay in contact with one another. And a couple of other people were, how do you have the money to buy that? And I'm like, we are rich. We are literally loaded. And I rattled off, the amount of money that I had on Kazina's sheet. And they're like, I don't have that. And I'm like, it's not my fault you don't write down the loot when we get it. We kind of had a conversation going back and forth there. And I went back into my notes and found some loot that nobody else had written down. So everyone has 1,000 gold and 400 platinum or something now. And it was like, if we were playing on Shard, this wouldn't be a problem because you can immediately distribute the gold to everyone's character sheet and not have to have an accountant in the party.
This is true, and I actually wouldn't mind switching to Shard at this point because I'm pretty sure we can, with the stuff that's in there, we can recreate everybody's abilities. But after playing around with the 2024 sheet, I don't want to turn around and then say in the next one, hey, let's start up with a new VTT here.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm going to give us a little bit more into this arc before I see if anybody wants to switch over to that.
I'm down with that. I'll probably keep mentioning it, but
Welcome to the Dungeon Master's Workshop.
we have covered beginning campaigns before back in episode 21. But that covered more logistical considerations for character creation, the scope of the campaign, and so on. In this episode, we wanted to talk about different ways to creatively kick off campaigns to get your players fully invested from the beginning, right in session 1. To start us off, why can't we just show up in a bar and take a quest from a mysterious stranger in a cloak in the corner, Jared?
Because the Tolkien estate already sued TSR for stealing stuff from... On a more serious note, some people really love classic tropes, and if you did that, they would absolutely love that. But since you're running for an entire table, if you've got one or two people there that are kind of rolling their eyes at that very standard setup, and the rest of them are all into it, you're still needing to make sure that everybody at the table is enjoying that setup.
I think that trope, that opening trope of just you're in a tavern, you're in a bar, and there's somebody in the corner who looks like they want to say something to you, is very much the sign of a low-pressure beer and pretzels type of campaign. No one's too invested in the story. They just want to get together and be social and be goofy and punch some monsters in the face. Maybe be murder hobos. Yeah, I don't know. But and if that's what everyone's down for at the table, go for it. If that's the amount of effort that the GM and the players want to put into the game, that's fine. But if you want things to be a little more than that, maybe try for something different. Maybe put a little more effort into it. And honestly, some of those beer and pretzel players, they might step up to the plate in ways you don't expect if you give them something to kind of strive for in that new campaign opening. You may also have players staring at you blankly as you kind of set something up cool, and they're just like, can I roll dice to hit monsters now? You got to figure out what your table needs.
Yes.
So what does having a solid opening give your campaign?
I think it helps you to have momentum for the rest of the game. When that first session really makes an impression on people and feels unique compared to other things that they think of, that's the impression that's going to flavor everything that they're doing from that point on, at least for a while.
Yeah.
If you're playing for 10 years, which I have never done in one campaign, but if you're playing in 10 years, maybe that beginning won't be as impactful, but there's going to be that time when you're 10th level, you're still probably going to look at that opening scene if it's really memorable and think about how that set everything in motion.
There's a lot of awkwardness with the beginning of a campaign if you don't have a good, cool opening to hook the players and their characters in right away. Everyone's got to start somewhere, and sometimes that's going to be your beginning. It doesn't mean the campaign's not going to be fantastic. It's just you're going to have to struggle to get past that kind of awkward opening. It gets the players immediately invested in the game rather than having to build up to settling into their characters and connecting with the world and the other players' characters.
I also think it kind of helps calibrate the stakes of the campaign, because if they are just random people that stumbled in off the farm that barely knew how to use a sword beforehand, that is a different feeling than if they are people that overheard the things being planned in the throne room, and even though they may not be tackling the big things, they're already privy to some of the moving and shaking that's going on in the kingdom at the very start of the campaign.
Does setting up connections between the characters as the game begins benefit the campaign as a whole?
Definitely. I mean, I think anytime you create more ties for a character, it's going to give you more to work with. I'm sure there is a critical mass of these are too many connections, none of them are meaningful anymore. Mm-hmm. But in general, I do think that that's going to be a very important thing, to know people, to be able to say, this is a person that I've known for this many years. This is somebody I just met right before the campaign started. And having all of that to be able to work with and tie in and weave into what you're going to do for that opening stage of the campaign.
The very first time I ever tried this, I did it poorly. I asked the players to set up connections with each other, but they were so invested in creating their own characters that they kind of hand-waved these very superficial connections to each other that didn't really benefit the game in any way, shape, or form. But I kind of learned my lesson from that and learned better ways to ask the players and guide the players in setting up these connections. I think at the start of the campaign, it can feel a little forced to have the group start working together as strangers. Most of your good players are going to go along with it anyway because it makes sense And the great players are going to start trying to form those connections right away because they know that's going to enhance the game for everyone at the table. You also may end up with some not so good players roadblocking the campaign because I don't know these people. Why would I bother working with them? And it's just like, come on, we're all here. Like, I get that it's awkward to just say these 4 to 6 strangers are going to start working together and doing these big adventurous things for no reason. But this is why setting up the connections ahead of time can really help solidify that start of the campaign. Alternatively, and I'll talk about this when I talk about some of my other campaign starts, come up with a reason why these characters will be working together as part of the campaign you're developing. What is the framework or mechanism that forces these 4 to 6 characters to go on adventures together? You gotta find your balance in what's going to work for your campaign specifically.
So I'm going to lob the comic book discussion grenade into the discussion here. This just got me to thinking about how characters having pre-existing connections playing into the origin of a party. And I'm thinking about how the original reason the Avengers got together is because Loki was messing with Thor by trying to get all of these other superheroes to fight him. And then they all end up realizing that, Loki's brother is the one that's messing with them, and then they all end up staying together as a superhero team.
You mean Thor's brother?
Yes. But what I was going to ask about that is that something, what would you tell the players if you were going to set up something similar?
First off, I would tell the GM, don't do this with strangers.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you know your players. Make sure you trust your players. Because, like I said, the good players are going to go along with the story anyway. The great players are going to figure out what they need to latch onto and play into.
Mm-hmm.
Not so good players and bad players are going to cause problems because they're going to be like, no, Thor must die. He's the bad guy. We must fight him. And be distrustful of him because, even if it is revealed that Loki has been doing all this stuff and manipulating things, well, no, I'm going to kill both of them because they're brother. I think you can do this, but it is always a very touchy start to frame an adversarial relationship between the PCs.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it. It can work. But I'm just saying, make sure you trust your players.
See, what I was thinking about with that is, how much of this do they need to play through and how much of this is just hitting the ground running and knowing that's their origin? Because I was wondering if you could do something like that and start them by saying, all of you were just in a fight, and it occurs to all of you that the person that's really been causing all of this is this person. In other words, you don't deceive them running up to it. You start from that moment that they all realize that Loki is the one messing with everybody. So you're not building up that animosity. You're not doing that. You're just telling people that it is a thing that has happened.
I think that can work. But again, I'd still stand by be sure you can trust your players.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, definitely.
Because there is a certain segment of players who will lean into all the negative aspects of that,
mm-hmm.
rather than realizing how to... It's the same reason I get frustrated about reluctant heroes.
Yes.
In RPGs. So the reluctant hero is the Bilbo Baggins, the Peter Parker at the beginning of his journey.
Luke Skywalker before his aunt and uncle died.
Yeah, these are characters who end up kind of on the hero's path, but they don't want to go because they've got stuff at home. They've got things they don't want to do that hero stuff. They don't want to go on the adventure. They don't want to deal with all of this. And the problem with this in relation to role-playing games are the players who take that concept for their character and then never move past it.
Yes.
Because the thing is like Bilbo and Peter Parker, Sam Winchester from Supernatural, all of these characters still accept the call to adventure. You have Bilbo finally telling the dwarves, no, go away. I don't want anything to do with you. And then as the dwarves are finally walking away, all of a sudden it dawns on him, no, I kind of really want to do this. And he's like, runs off after them. I'm going on an adventure. Peter Parker has his dramatic turn with losing Uncle Ben and realizes, no, I need to accept that with great power comes great responsibility. With Sam and Dean, it's like, and I don't necessarily want my GM to traumatize all their players to make them go on the adventure. But the idea is still that the players need to understand that it is their responsibility to go on the adventure.
I was going to say, bringing up between Star Wars and Spider-Man and Supernatural, like the real key to this is murdering family members.
Yeah, I was like, I realized going there, I'm like, no, that's not where I want to go. I've dealt with too many players over the years who have made the character who is reluctant to be an adventurer, and they made every single session about their character's unwillingness to engage with the story, and that's a problem. And it's the same thing with setting it up with that type of framework where these characters were all fighting each other, and now they realize, oh no, we've been duped, we should work together. You still may end up with that player that like, no, I don't trust these people. Understand the players you have at your table and understand the pitfalls you could run into with certain tropes and archetypes and that type of thing.
By the way, dear listener, I was not implying that you should start a campaign that way. I just kind of wanted to walk through, if you tried to do this, how would you do it and should you do it? And I think we came to probably not, but also carefully.
This could be a pin for an episode regarding the potential for PvP in a game. I mean, I think I've been pretty clear that I'm not a fan of PvP.
Oh, me either.
But it is something that can happen in these style of games. So it might be worth pinning that and talking about it. Either way, let's get back to starting our campaigns. Have you ever done prologue scenes with your player characters?
Definitely. It's funny because every time you're talking about running Tales of the Old Margrave, I'm thinking about how I ran Tales of the Old Margrave.
We should probably come up with different terms for your Old Margrave and my Old Margrave, because we're going to reference both of them.
The older Margrave and the not quite as old Margrave. But when I ran that campaign, we had 3 of 5 characters were bearfolk. My concept overall was that every character had some form of archfey that was pushing them towards some of these missions, so that some of the missions that don't have a real natural flow from one to the next still had a reason for someone to be buzzing in their ears to say, you should probably go check this out. 2 of the PCs wandered upon this gathering after we did a real brief, connection to their archfey. One of which was our halfling warlock who had Baba Yaga as her patron.
I'm going to note for people, there were 3 bear folk and a blonde halfling.
Yes. That was also very intentional. But the bear folk, there's a thing that the king of bears, who is the archfey that's, in charge of bears and wilderness and things of that nature in Midgard, he has like this festival every spring where bearfolk show up and they participate in these games, and he crowns certain bearfolk the winners. So I had them play through some of these games, even though I knew the PCs were going to be the ones that won it, because then they're his champions that he's sending out to do all of this stuff. Your reward is you get to drink and eat more than everyone else, and now go do dangerous stuff for me. Another one is when I did my game that was set in Zobek, I really wanted to emphasize the clash between a couple different thieves guilds that exist in that setting. So we started off with the adventuring party in medias res in a fight with a bunch of members of a thieves guild where a job went wrong. And I told them, I'm going to start you in the middle of a fight. You were trying to do a job. It did not go as planned because you were not given enough information. So they fight their way out of this and make their way back to the bar that they were using as their headquarters. And then as they get back to the bar, I got to frame this with some of the people that they knew at the bar, talking to them and going, oh man, did another one go south for you? And just, start like laying in like all of this stuff that happened that wasn't great. And all this was leading into having a more reliable patron going forward. But I wanted to emphasize that they weren't incompetent. They were just getting some really terrible jobs right in a row. And it just kept butting them against these these thieves guilds that were fighting against one another. And then finally, this is actually one of my favorite framing things that I've done is in the Curse of Strahd game. So at the beginning of the campaign, we only had 3 of the 5 players that I have now, and they had made up a bugbear, a changeling, and an elf. So because these were all Fae related, I wanted to have some Fae starting point for all of them. So I actually had them start off in the Witchlight Carnival. That is featured in the Wild Beyond the Witchlight, but we weren't playing that adventure. I love the idea, though, that they were starting off in this Feywild thing, because that is like the opposite of, what Ravenloft is. So they play through some scenes where they're just doing their regular job. One of them was a bounty hunter, so she was chasing somebody through the carnival. One was investigating something. The elf was giving a reading because she was a fortune teller. And they all end up in one place because they are chasing this one shape-shifting criminal. And as they get to the edge of the carnival, the storm blows up and the mists of Ravenloft, surround them and take them. And then they don't know where they're at. And I really kind of like that because it did kind of take them from, you are in this place where all of you make sense, and now you are in a place where none of your characters make sense.
One of mine, and I need to preface this. When I started the Veterans of the Gauntlet campaign, I was coming off of a couple of failed campaigns. I had tried to start a couple of different games, and I just ended up like fumbling the ball. It's a Super Bowl sports reference because the Super Bowl just happened. I just fumbled the ball and like ended up completely flaking out on the campaign, and this happened more than once. And I was really great at starting campaigns, but I wasn't good at continuing them and maintaining them, and I wanted to get past that. And my response to that was to start this Veterans of the Gauntlet campaign, which was set in Eberron and using Pathfinder as the mechanics of it. Again, I'm good at starting campaigns. It's the maintaining them that I tend to have a little bit of a struggle with. This is kind of why I did this opening for the campaign. The idea is that the characters all arrive in Sharn for a 5-year reunion to a major battle that they won in the last war. It's 2 years past the end of the last war. Some of them have been together, some of them haven't, but they're meeting together in Sharn for this, and they arrive at their compatriot Redley's bar, and it's this very awkward beginning, and they're kind of like, yeah, hey, how are you doing? And then I'm like, okay, flashback. And we flash back to when they were first level characters meeting for the first time on the road from the kingdom they were defending to the location they were going to be defending. And I played out a whole adventure with them as first level characters, being sent off together as a group to deal with a problem and figure out what was going on and stop a major issue, and like that kind of bonded them together. So once we went back to the present and their 5th level characters in Sharn for this reunion, all of a sudden there's a little more of that real camaraderie. All of a sudden there's that little more of a connection between them. And that meant they were all much more willing to take the bait when I started laying out the plot of the beginning of that campaign. In the new Margrave campaign, I did and I talked about this last week, I believe, I did a quick scene with each pair of characters that kind of explained how they got the mission and how to go to the quest giver. And it was kind of a nice way to establish each of the characters in relation to their history in the world so far.
I think it's interesting, too, because just looking at some of the things that both of us said, not only did some of these opening things ground them in what types of things their group was going to be doing, or the next adventure that they were going to be going into, but like when you're talking about that Veterans of the Gauntlet game, that very much grounds it in Eberron.
Mm-hmm.
Like the setting now matters because it is part of the framing device for these characters, and I really like that. It's kind of like what I was thinking about when I was trying to do the equal and opposite thing with the Witchlight Carnival and Barovia. So I really like that idea that if your setting is going to be a big deal, even if it's not the crux of what the adventure is going to be, but it's going to matter because it's going to provide flavor, it's going to provide something unique, then yeah, that is another great thing to establish right up front. In my Zobek game, they knew they were in Zobek because they were in the middle of this fight between these 3 different thieves guilds that I had specifically looked up from the book, that I wanted to be that kind of underlying thing that was pervading that part of the campaign.
So what do you think is the most important information you need from the players about their characters to plan your campaign beginning? And I ask this question because there's usually a disconnect with many GMs between how they're starting their campaign and who the player characters are. And I think you get the best results if you kind of blend the two.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, this is why I know some GMs that will like to do a session 0 and then try and play out a scene or 2 at the end of the session 0.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally do not like doing that. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm saying I don't like it because I want to see how all of these characters shape out as we're discussing them, what their connections are, things that they've come up with. And once I have that, I want to take that away and have some time to think about it and connect those things to some of the things that I wanted to do to start the campaign. But I think knowing the types of people that a character would associate with, seeing what backgrounds they've picked and if those backgrounds matter to them, which I'm just going to say, some people's backgrounds do not matter to them because they picked it randomly or because they wanted certain proficiencies. But if they do indicate that it matters to their character, that is going to help you define who they are and what they want to do. I also kind of like knowing what an average day looks like for this character before the campaign begins.
Yeah. I generally want to know, I want to know the gist of their life before the start of the campaign. Where are they from? What's important to them? Who is important to them? Why are they willing to be an adventurer? I don't need pages and pages of backstory. I want the elevator pitch. And really, that's all you should have at the beginning of a campaign, because you want to be able to integrate, and I'm saying this to the players, you want to be able to integrate your character into the world. So you want to have an idea of who the character is and maybe some details about them, but you don't want to have it be so detailed that it ends up either clashing with what the GM is trying to do or what some of the other players are trying to do. So have an elevator pitch and be willing to adapt as you go.
Bullet points.
Yeah, bullet points. To me, having that elevator pitch is the most important part, because it makes the game, it can help me make the game about the PCs. Yes, you as the GM come up with the idea for the campaign or using a pre-written module, but to make it truly memorable for the players, you want to tailor what you are doing to fit their characters. As I kind of mentioned before, there are too many GMs out there who are like, this is my world, and the characters are just in it. This is one of the reasons why I struggle with sandbox games.
Mm-hmm.
Because very often it's the GM has put their love and attention into creating the world, and it doesn't matter who the characters are, they're just there exploring the world. Whereas to me, it's the characters are the protagonist of the story, so I want things to matter.
Yes. We should probably do a whole other thing on sandboxes, even though I don't have the best of experiences trying to run a sandbox, especially not one that isn't a published adventure.
Yeah. I mean, I think we would have to, we'd have to caveat that episode with the concept that neither of us have the best experiences with sandboxes. Your mileage may vary here. We've talked a little bit about this, but what are some of the techniques that you've used to start campaigns?
So something that's kind of developed in probably since COVID. I was trying to think, like, how far back do some of these things go? I was like, yeah, COVID. Like, that is a very clear dividing line in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
But what I've been trying to do in a lot of campaigns is say, can you think of an NPC that that you associate with on a regular basis? Doesn't have to be a family member, doesn't have to be someone you're close with, but it's somebody that you deal with on a regular basis. And what is a place in the campaign? Doesn't have to be super detailed. It just, is there a specific tavern you always go to? Is there a place you always go to get breakfast? That's the kind of stuff that you can weave simple story elements into, and maybe they turn into something big, or maybe it's just a nice background element, but it does provide some additional texture.
Yeah. I've already talked about Veterans of the Gauntlet and Tales of the Old Margrave and what I did for those. When I did Depths of Zendrick, it was the reality show. It was basically a competition to see who would be chosen to go on this expedition to Zendrick. And I had a lot of fun setting that up. I basically set the parameters for the campaign as obviously you guys should make characters that can work together, that aren't stepping on each other's toes. But I don't care who you are, where you're from. You just have to be interested in participating in this competition and want to win a spot on the expedition to Zendrick. Your reasons can be your own. And that ended up being a lot of fun because they all came in as strangers. None of the PCs knew each other. And, like I mentioned before, that can be a problem. But I had a plan because all these characters came in together and we played through the registration part of it, which was fun having them see all the other NPCs. I spent way too much time creating NPCs for this. My players made fun of me for it, but made all these NPCs. I had 18 NPCs of the people applying to be part of this thing, plus all the NPCs that were running the competition and all of this. It's like I kind of went in overhead. But the whole idea was they get in there, they are accepted into, they pass the sign your name and your insurance waiver part of it, and then you do the competition, the individual competition part, and then you pass that, and they're all in the auditorium where they get randomly assigned to groups. Narratively speaking, this was completely random. It was not random at all. Magically, all of the PCs ended up in the same group together. It was funny because a couple of the players were really worried. Like, what are you going to do if we end up in groups with NPCs? And I'm like, you really think I'm going to do that? Either way, it was a really cool way to kind of shove these strangers together and force them to work together. And, I have good players. They all leaned into it. They started building connections right away. They realized they worked together. They stood up against some bullies together. It was a really cool way to kind of bond them and show that, hey, look, this group works together well. In the Dragon Heist game, I thought I had a great idea. It didn't work as well as I wanted to. I should have established character connections in that one, but the idea was that each of the characters had received an invitation to come basically work with a noble in Waterdeep, Lady Xylena, as their patron, and that she was putting them together as a group. The secret thing that never really got revealed in the campaign was that Lady Xylena was competing with some other nobles in Waterdeep to see who could put together the best adventuring group. And they were using scrying magic to basically watch their groups do stuff. And that never really came out in the campaign because in the end, the characters didn't get along. And it reached the point where I'm like, it makes absolutely no sense for your characters to continue working together. You hate each other. So we basically finished the Dragon Heist adventure and then kind of called it quits on that campaign. Now, this is not something I have done in a fantasy game, but it is something I have done in other games, and that is that the characters are kidnapped or taken from their daily lives, and they wake up together and have to deal with their circumstances together. There's, I've usually used this in superhero settings where they were normal people living normal lives, and all of a sudden they wake up in some sort of laboratory and they now have superpowers and they need to band together to work against the people that have done this to them. But you could very easily put this into a fantasy game, whether you want to lean fully into I believe the anime term is isekai, where they're characters from the real world who are now suddenly in this fantasy world. You could totally do that. Or it's just some powerful being scooped these characters up from wherever they were in the world and plopped them in a place and said, do this for me.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a very interesting way to take strangers and put them together and encourage them to work together.
And if you are the type of person that sees isekai and thinks, I don't want that in my D&D, too bad, because the 2024 rulebooks have the cartoon characters as iconics all over the place, and that was isekai. You cannot escape it now.
It's just not the term we used back then.
Right, but that's exactly what that is. The funny thing is, the reason we have a show together is because as you're describing how you've started superhero games, I'm like, that is exactly how I started my DC Adventures game.
That's actually how I started the Embers Ignited campaign that I am currently running, which is a Savage Worlds Supers game, and it is a group of amazing players, so I am constantly thrilled when they tell me they had a good time in the session. Anyway, what about campaigns that you started and were running, but then paused and put on hiatus? What do you do when you're restarting them? Do you do anything cool to restart them?
Asterisk, look back into the campaign journal part of this episode for us talking about what we did after we were on pause for a few months to restart the Morea Midgard game, because that's exactly what was going on there with starting them off on the ship so that, we were already underway on the mission that they were supposed to be on. One of the big things that I did this with is in my 3rd edition game, we had like an extended hiatus, and we really wanted to give the campaign a wrap-up. We wanted it to feel like it ended. We just didn't want it to be, we all just drifted away. So we put together a few more sessions so that we could do like this final arc. And in that final arc, we ended up jumping forward, like, I think it was 5 years. And what we did was we talked to each of the players about, like, what were you trying to do and what do you think you would have accomplished in this point in time? And that's where we have them start off, and then everybody kind of meets up again after they have accomplished these things, coming back together after 5 years to, basically the Shadowvar were invading the Dale lands, so they were all coming back together at the Cleric of Helm's temple that he had finally gotten built, because that was what he was trying to save up for when they were adventuring previously. So now we just skip five years ahead. The temple is already here. This is where you all gather. It was very interesting because that player decided that since something kind of tragic happened at the end of the first part of the campaign, that his character was now very dour, and it was a stark difference from how he was before that. And everybody, like, in the group, like, they're in character, were trying to, like, you used to smile, you used to joke, and like, I have duty now, that's all I have left. And it was wild. It was a lot of fun, but it was very much that whole, we're going to skip ahead, we're going to assume that you accomplished some of your goals, we're going to reframe what the major threat is for this next story arc, and go.
My first piece of advice on that is it's before you end the campaign. Basically, try and find a good stopping point. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be you're wrapping up the campaign for good. It can just be a good mid-season finale, which can be, if done right, a cliffhanger. It's usually not, like they're in the middle of a fight and you just stop. It's more like, they've done the stuff, they think they're going home to rest, and oh no, they see the dragon sitting on top of their tavern. Dun dun dun, fade to black. Find a good way to wrap up the first part of that campaign. That way, when you revive it, you have you have a good starting point, or you have something to work with.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important. Give all your players a summary of what happened before. I'm not talking about the 4 months between when we last played the Maria game and when we were able to pick it up now. Mm-hmm. I'm talking like it's been 1.5 years since you played. It's been 5 years since you last played. Give your players a summary of what happened in the campaign before and where they are now and what's going to be happening at the beginning of the campaign. I really like the idea of doing a time jump.
Mm-hmm.
If you can work it in, that's done in stories all the time. And honestly, if the players really love their characters, they will absolutely be willing to dive right back in.
Mm-hmm.
You just may need to make the on-ramp something worthy of them.
Also, if you're going to leave the campaign on a cliffhanger and not come back to it for a few years, don't do the BBC Sherlock, where when you come back, you don't bother to explain how the cliffhanger resolved. You make it a joke in the episode that no one is ever going to explain it to you.
You know, I've thought about this, my Veterans of the Gauntlet campaign. The players still express interest in going back there. We just have a few hurdles in our way. They had reached the level in Pathfinder that was not fun for me to run anymore because it was getting too crunchy. Some of their characters do not translate well into 5e, so we've talked about it a lot, but we have never made the transition. But I've thought about restarting that because we ended with them teleporting away from place on Ice White Isle where they had found the last artifact, and the teleport going wrong and them getting scattered who knows where. That's where we ended. And I've been like, what can I do with that? And I have some ideas, and I kind of like the idea of a little bit of a time jump. You know, especially since the Depths of Zendrick campaign actually works in that same universe and is about 5 years after the end of that last one. So that gives me some ideas.
You know what scares me is the more you were talking about the Depths of Zendrick and how you had that set up, and the whole like being kidnapped from your regular lives, in my brain I started formulating this, what if you did Squid Games in Dark Sun? This is not a thought I should follow up on.
No.
But that is what occurred to me as I was listening to both of these things.
I mean, I know there are people out there who are sort of like, ooh. But that's some dark thoughts there, Jared. Any final advice on good campaign beginnings?
I think, speaking of bullet points, my bullet points here would be have that beginning scene in a memorable location, have it be a memorable event, have active NPCs to interact with, create some kind of momentum going into the campaign, like the thing you did doesn't just exist in a vacuum, it keys into something else that's going on. And if possible, foreshadow a longer term event, but that one's kind of the optional one because sometimes we have no idea and you shouldn't force something to go in a direction that it's not naturally going to go.
I think my major last piece of advice is tie it to the PCs. Make sure that the opening is something that takes the PCs, takes the characters the players are bringing to the table, and puts them into the opening in such a way that the players and their characters are invested in what's going on and are willing to follow the adventure forward.
I agree.
Now let's join Ange and Jared for some downtime research, where they do the work so we don't have to.
So now we're going to do some of our downtime research. Every episode, we're going to look for something related to D&D that we want to pass along to the listeners. That might be products, websites, videos, or podcasts, but it will always be something that we think will enhance your D&D experience. But first, our Eldritch Invocation. We have a Patreon now, so if you'd like to help us do this show and provide some additional content for you, we would love it if you decided to join. We've got our own Discord, and we've already started releasing material. We have new spells for D&D 5e. We have campaign material for the Heroes of Havel's Way. I made some magic swords. I did a world building template. I did a bunch of layer actions that you can plug into different things. So there is stuff up there. You can clean up if you just follow us.
It's patreon.com/Thac0WA. Look, we have mentioned Gnome Stew every single time we do this show because we both have written for Gnome Stew. It's a major part of our lives. But I don't think either of us have ever just given a shout out to Gnome Stew. So I wanted to mention it because I actually wrote an article on resurrecting campaigns that fits one of those last questions we discussed.
Mm-hmm.
Go check out Gnome Stew. If you don't read it, regularly. It is definitely worth checking. There is a wealth of information there for gamers and anyone interested in role-playing games. Hit up the site, read the new articles, click on any given author at the bottom of the page, and you can read their back catalog of fantastic articles. I personally think I'm delightful, so take a look at my articles.
I agree.
It is gnomestew.com, and just dig in and like a lot of the stuff we talk about has been talked about on Gnome Stew.
Indeed. So last minute, I changed my mind because I was going to talk about some of the animated series that are on Netflix, and go look at those. That's fine. I'm not going to talk about them now. I've changed my mind. Because I saw an ad pop up for custom dice by Hero Forge.
What?
So this is the company that, you know, you can go in and design the miniatures, and you can order the miniatures, or you can order the figure flats, or all of that stuff. There's so many more. Like, if you went early on when Hero Forge first started and you haven't been back there, there is a ridiculous amount of customization that you can do now. And apparently they are starting up a Kickstarter so that you can do like the clear acrylic dice. It will have the thing that you design in the middle of that die.
Wow.
Yes. I love stuff like that. It has not started yet. They just have the Kickstarter page up so that you can go there and click on it to get notified when it starts. But I just wanted to shout that out because that's cool. I'm sorry. I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff.
That is very cool. And I was actually like, wait, where are all the shows Jared was talking about?
I'll mention them again someday.
We are happily part of the Polygamers Podcast Network, helping you run and play your best games. We think you'll enjoy another Polygamers podcast like
The Gnomecast. Several gnomes from Gnome Stew get together to talk about gaming topics and themselves in an effort to entertain you and to avoid being thrown in the stew.
We have used up all of our resources, so I think it's time for a long rest. I hope this adventure was rewarding for you, so we hope you'll go exploring with us when we start our next adventure.